Hello and welcome to my channel, Rhino here. Today we're looking at a video of David Rives interviewing Mike Riddle about fuzzy words. If you're not familiar with David Rives or Mike Riddle, then I'm kinda jealous. But Mike Riddle is a mathematician who is more fond of the quote mine than your average creationist, and David Rives is the guy who generally has a pretty high quality production, but makes you want to punch him whenever you see him. Now, just to be clear, I do not condone the punching of David Rives, but I do understand the urge. There's just something about someone who isn't just wrong, but is so damn smug about how wrong they are. Anyway, I will be skipping quite a bit of this one. He spends the first 5 minutes trying to poison the well against Darwin, as if Darwin's personal beliefs when he came up with his theory of evolution have anything to do with whether or not evolution is true. But I suppose it's just hard for people like Rives to get away from the idea of an authority figure declaring what truth is, so let's just skip that and get on to his interview with Mike.
I like the topic because we see these fuzzy words a lot, even in scientific journals and supposedly these expert opinions, we're seeing these things. So break that down for us and explain what you're talking about.
Yes.
Fuzzy words.
Fuzzy words and magic words.
Okay.
We use them all the time, like you say. Even as Christians, we use them. Now, I want to point out there's nothing wrong with using these kind of words that we're going to show.
Okay.
It's just the context we use it in sometimes can be wrong.
I'm skipping through most of the preamble. I just wanted to show you this so that you could see the bait and switch that they're going to do momentarily. They start off by telling you that you can even see these fuzzy words in scientific journals, but then they follow that up with the fact that there's nothing wrong with fuzzy words depending on what context you're using them in, and admitting that they themselves use fuzzy words. Now, I have not, as of this writing, watched through their whole video yet, but I am willing to bet that after telling you that you can find fuzzy words in an actual peer-reviewed journal, they will not reference a single journal when giving examples. Even though I would agree that you can find so-called fuzzy words in journals, they still avoid them, probably because of the whole context matters thing. In journals, they are much less fuzzy about the things that these guys want to seem fuzzy, but they still leave room open for future discoveries, and that's where the fuzziness comes in.
Let's stop focusing so much on the evidence when we're confronted with so-called scientific evidence to support evolution. Let's look at the words they're used there in their statements.
In other words, how you present your evidence is more important to these guys than what the evidence actually is. Now let's see how long they can go before appealing to evidence. I'm going to be skipping more, but if you're playing along at home, they just said not to worry about the evidence at 8 minutes and 39 seconds into their video.
So fuzzy words, what are they? We believe, we think, must have, could have, might have. Our opinion is we guess over millions of years.
Yeah, some of those are kind of fuzzy. Others are words that are good for when you're summarizing or generalizing a topic that you don't have time to go into depth into, like must have. If my wife bakes some cookies, then we watch a movie together, and at the end of the movie the cookie jar is empty, we know that the only people home were us and the kids. We can then say, it must have been one of the kids. This is not fuzzy, this is a conclusion based on the available evidence. We don't need to go into great detail about what all the evidence for and against it having been a kid is. We both know it. It's not important at the moment. Suffice it to say that it must have been one of the kids. And I would be very surprised to find words like we believe, our opinion is, or we guess in a peer-reviewed paper anywhere outside of the end of the paper where they're explaining what some of the implications of their findings could turn out to be if they are researched further. And, as you stated earlier, context is everything. If I think that my one son ate a bunch of cookies even though my other son and my daughter had equal opportunity to get at the cookies, I might say, my opinion is that he ate the cookies. I believe that. I think that he did. But this, by itself, makes it look less certain than it could be. Maybe I'm saying that after having noticed his face is covered in chocolate and finding crumbs in his bed. In the context of the evidence, my statements make perfect sense, but it is possible that some form of exonerating evidence will come to light in the future, so pending further investigation, it makes sense to leave room to correct mistakes in the future.
Well, what's so fuzzy about those words? Well, when those words are used, what it means is they don't have the observable evidence to support their claim.
And there we go. The timestamp on this is 9 minutes and 34 seconds. They went less than 1 minute from saying that they're not going to look at evidence to appealing to evidence, or rather a lack thereof in this case. This is a way to dismiss actual evidence on the grounds of how it is presented, nothing more. If they are honest and won't be needing to appeal to evidence, then they are implicitly admitting that their method is dishonest. If they are dishonest and try to sneak evidence into the discussion that is supposed to be leaving the evidence off the table, then they are also being dishonest. Either way, their tactics are dishonest. Now, why do you suppose that creationists need to rely on dishonest tactics? I'll give you a hint. It's not because they're correct.
And here's one in a life science textbook, 7th grade textbook.
They shouldn't use fuzzy words in scientific journals. To prove that they're using them wrong, let's go to a 7th grade textbook.
And this is a statement they had in there. Paleontologists think that Archaeopteryx and today's birds descended from some kind of reptile, possibly from a dinosaur. Well, is that true or not? Well, let's point out the fuzzy words. Think that.
Okay.
In other words, they don't have the evidence there. They just think that this is what happened.
Or, and hear me out on this one, I know it's a pretty radical idea, but it might be that they're writing for their target audience. You know, 7th graders? 12-year-old kids? Does a textbook aimed at 12-year-old kids need to go into great detail about why we think that Archaeopteryx was descended from a reptile? I mean, I suppose it probably does list some of the characteristics outside of the bit that you're quoting, like maybe it goes into detail about how it has claws on 3 of its toes like reptiles, while no extant bird species has more than 2 claws on its digits that are not fused. And it might mention the hand bones that are not fused, the metatarsals of the foot bones are not fused, the presence of vertebrae in the tail, the location where the skull is connected to the spine, the teeth, the positioning of the nasal openings. All of these are reptile characteristics that Archaeopteryx has. It could also go into its bird characteristics, like the flight feathers, the flexibility of the first toe, and the shape of the pubis. There are even characteristics that seem to be halfway between birds and reptiles, like the angle between the ilium and the pubis, which is partway between where it is in birds and where it is in reptiles. That's the evidence. The observation that Archaeopteryx has characteristics that belong in the bird category, ones that belong in the reptile category, and more that seem to be partway between the two. This evidence exists. It is out there. But no, we need to take issue with the wording used in a textbook for 12-year-olds in order to try and claim that the evidence isn't actually there.
That's the first clue. They don't have any evidence. Some kind of, they're not even sure what kind of reptile this is.
Okay.
And here's your real scientific term, possibly. So what do they really know about this? Nothing.
It's not that hard to find out what we do really know about this. And yeah, we don't know exactly which reptile it descended from. And it was more than just descended from dinosaurs, it was itself a dinosaur. But given the 2002 publication date for that book, it's understandable that they were less certain on that point. Look it up now, and you will definitely find more than the nothing that you are claiming.
Now let's take another one. Here's out of the USA Today newspaper. There are likely tens of billions of Earth-like planets in our Milky Way galaxy. In fact, the nearest Earth-like planet may be only 12 light years away.
Okay.
And while a universe of hundreds of billions of galaxies, our entire universe must contain billions of Earth-like planets.
Okay.
Well, let's look for the fuzzy words and magic words. How about there are likely?
Yeah, any guess as to why that one's not specific? Could it possibly be because we can only count objects in numbers as large as they appear in the galaxy in terms of statistical likelihood? Earth-like is actually a more fuzzy word than there are likely there, because there are likely is based on rigorous statistical analysis, while Earth-like can not just be used to describe a planet with environmental conditions similar to Earth, but any rocky planet at all. With this definition, Mercury, Venus, and Mars are all Earth-like planets. I'd actually be interested in seeing this one in context so I could see what kind of definition they are using for Earth-like here. But unfortunately, the totally scientific journal, USA Today, only archives their issues back to 2016, so that won't be possible. Thankfully, though, I was able to find the actual research paper that this article was probably based on. It was published in October of 2013 in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, or PNAS. Best journal name ever. The paper is called Prevalence of Earth-sized Planets Orbiting Sun-like Stars. So by reading through the paper, we find that they are talking about small rocky planets whose orbits would allow for the existence of liquid water on their surface. Now, from the actual paper, we find that 22% of Sun-like stars harbor Earth-sized planets orbiting in their habitable zones. The nearest such planet may be within 12 light years. The only fuzzy words in there are about how close the nearest ones may be. And do you know why that is? It's because they didn't find any within 12 light years, but with 22% of Sun-like stars having Earth-like planets in their habitable zones, then with how many Sun-like stars are within 12 light years, statistically speaking, at least one Earth-sized planet in the star's habitable zone should be there. Does this guarantee that it will be there? No, but it is likely.
Okay.
That means they really don't know how many are out there at all. They're just making a claim.
No, they don't know for sure. But as the law of large numbers shows us, the larger the sample size, the more likely it will be to approach the expected results. Which means that if it's true that 22% of Sun-like stars have an Earth-like planet in their habitable zone, there will be around 40 billion Earth-like planets in the Milky Way galaxy alone. Now, it could very well be that our number is wrong for reasons we haven't been able to detect, but no matter what, the fact remains that Earth-like planets exist outside of our solar system in their stars' habitable zones.
This next one, I love this next one. In fact, maybe.
It's contradictory.
Yes, it is.
No, that is not contradictory. It is a fact that the closest Earth-like planet might be about 12 light years away from us based on their data. If I roll a fair die, it is a fact that a 6 might come up. Just because there are more than one option does not make the fact that one option is available not a fact.
Okay.
When you start looking for these things, and must contain, why do they say must contain? Well, can't they say we know they contain?
Right.
Did you know that sometimes using the word must can in fact be a certainty? It's not that it must contain them, like, I need evolution to be true, so the universe just must contain billions of Earth-like planets. It's more like, based on this math that we've done, other planets that fit these parameters must be out there.
They're making a claim without the evidence.
Maybe the USA Today article was, but the paper that it was based on is just full of charts and graphs and data sets and all based on actual measurements, not to mention the dozens of citations to other research papers that all contain their own charts and graphs and data and whatnot.
Well, let's go another one. Here's the Perot Museum. This one sounds awful technical, though.
Oh no, not technical! Didn't we just learn last week that technical means that the scientists must be hiding something? If you can't dumb it down so that a 12-year-old can understand it perfectly, it can't be true.
Experiments with model protocells show how early life could have begun evolving. Protocells must grow quickly and reproduce most often when they contain genetic material that can copy itself.
Okay.
These protocells compete. Outcompete others. Yes. Well, let's start with this. Model protocells.
So now you're taking issue with the fact that scientists sometimes use models in their research? Do you even know what a scientific model is? Are you just thinking of how we use modeling in meteorology and realizing that we often predict the weather wrong and so deciding that this means that all models are equally fuzzy? Well, allow me to elucidate. A model, simply put, is a physical, mathematical, or conceptual representation of a real phenomenon that is difficult to observe directly. In this case, it's a physical representation. We will never be able to directly observe the first protocells. That is a fact. We don't have access to time travel and probably never will. So when we build artificial protocells in a lab, these are the physical representations of what would have happened in nature. Ergo, they are models. If we somehow manage to figure out exactly how the first protocells emerged, then still any experiments that demonstrate it in a lab will necessarily be models. Whether you like it or not, we have several working models for how the first protocells could have developed, and several of them have been experimentally confirmed. And we're talking honest-to-goodness cellular behavior made out of the most basic components of a cell. So just a bit of membrane and some genetic material, and you have basic cells that grow, divide, and are able to incorporate material from their surroundings. Nothing fuzzy about it.
I'd like to ask, what in the world is a protocell? Has that ever been observed?
There are papers about various types of protocells. There are books on the subject. There are TED Talks about it. It is an incredibly easy subject to find information on. You just have to do a tiny little bit of looking.
There's no such thing as a protocell. We see things that are not cells, and we see things that are cells.
And we see things that are in between. Not quite alive enough to call it a living cell, but certainly behaving in remarkably similar ways as real cells. Almost like they're primitive precursors to real cells. One might call them proto-cells.
Then could have begun evolving. Notice that word, could have, those
Right.
words? They don't know, do they?
No.
Yes, because we don't know for sure how life actually got started. So protocell experiments show different ways that life could have begun. We don't know, so we don't pretend that we do. Would you prefer that we presented these models as if we know with complete 100% certainty that this is how it happened when we really don't? I don't understand why intellectual honesty is presented as if it's supposed to be a point against science.
This is all based on if evolution happened, this is what might have happened.
Okay.
No, we know evolution happened. We just don't know how life began. So it's more, this is one of several potential ways that life could have begun, and then once life begins, evolution starts happening. You're getting the cart before the horse here.
And then finally, these protocells outcompete others? Have they ever watched a track meet with these things in it? No.
I'm going to be generous here and assume that you are aware that how fast a cell can move is not necessarily going to be the deciding factor in competition with other cells. If one protocell was just a little bit better at absorbing needed nutrients from its surroundings than the others, then it will be able to reproduce more than the other ones. So its genetic material will be more prevalent. It's natural selection, a concept that is so basic that I thought that even creationists accepted it.
Okay, so if they have no observational evidence, then they start sticking in fuzzy words.
Yes.
No, definitely not.
So far, my prediction has held up perfectly. Not a single example that you've brought up yet has been from anything peer-reviewed. It's been textbooks, newspapers, and museum signs. They are summarizing complicated topics in a way that is digestible for their target audiences. As such, they will describe some of the more technical stuff in a, shall we say, less than specific fashion. Up to this point, when I've tracked down the actual technical papers that are related to what you're talking about, the words have been very much less fuzzy.
To sort of make you think that they know what they're talking about.
Right.
Spoken by someone who literally makes his living trying to make people think he knows what he's talking about on subjects that he is absolutely clueless about.
Ironic.
And this, our students could get caught by this and think this must be true. Protocells, they gloss right over it. Stop. What do you mean by a protocell? Has it ever been observed?
Okay. So we go back to three basic questions.
How do you know it's true? Has it ever been observed? Are you making any assumptions?
Okay.
Go right back to those.
I wonder how a belief in young Earth creationism holds up to these three questions. How do you know it's true? Because my specific interpretation of the Bible insists that it is, even though the Bible itself never explicitly gives an age for the Earth, and the stories that I'm basing this belief on are written either poetically or are completely laced with metaphor, implying that the story itself could be metaphorical. Has it ever been observed? No. Are you making any assumptions? Plenty. That two contradictory creation accounts are in perfect agreement with each other when a plain reading shows them to not be. That a metaphorical interpretation is impossible despite the millions to billions of Christians who do interpret it metaphorically. That several million highly trained scientists from dozens of different scientific fields over the last several hundred years have all made such basic mistakes that anyone without years of training are able to figure out. Also that the laws of physics were different at least during the time of Noah's flood, and more. Now let's answer these questions for evolution. How do you know it's true? Well, for that you can watch my series, which is on part 8 so far, that goes through the evidence for evolution. So far in that series, there is about an hour and a half of nothing but me explaining evidence that points to evolution. No snarky comments, no responding to creationists, no dick jokes even. Just explaining the evidence for evolution. Has it ever been observed? Yes, E. coli that have developed the ability to metabolize citrate. A new species of mosquito evolved in the London Underground. Wild mustard has turned into broccoli, kale, kohlrabi, cauliflower, and more. You may have noticed a new virus in the last few months that evolved to work in a different species. So, yes, it has been observed. Are you making any assumptions? Yeah. We assume that life started at some point. That's a fairly safe assumption, though, and while we do not know how it happened, it almost certainly did happen. So, sure, stuff got into that little gap if you want, but that doesn't affect evolution at all. Yeah, you were talking about protocells, so I should have been answering these questions specific to protocells, but do you know what? That's research into the origin of life. When a scientist builds a protocell in a lab, they are not assuming that this is what happened in nature. They are experimenting to find out if it is possible for that to have happened in nature. And while 2 of these 3 questions are good questions for a healthy skepticism on any topic, the has it ever been observed is not necessarily, depending on what you mean by observed. If you mean we observe the evidence of something, then sure, good question. Have we observed the evidence? Sure we have. But has it been directly observed? Well, something doesn't need to be directly observed in order to be scientifically valid. We have never directly observed gravity. We have only ever seen the effects of gravity, but most creationists are okay with gravity.
Joseph Selk. Now, he's a good astronomer, and I read his book, The Big Bang. Very good astronomer, believes in evolution. Now, in this statement, he's going to talk about how galaxies form.
Okay.
This is very technical, so let's read through it.
Okay.
Imagine that infinitesimal fluctuations in density were present in the early universe. The expansion of the universe must have exerted a stabilizing influence on such irregularities. The expanding universe has the effect of greatly impeding what otherwise might have been catastrophic forces. Nevertheless, the process of growth of fluctuations went on for a very long time. I like to ask people, how many understood what he just said there?
Right.
I mean, I don't understand it perfectly, and it probably is easier to understand in context, but it seems to me that he's explaining how the early universe was not uniform, and had the universe not been expanding, these density fluctuations would have had the effect of preventing the formation of galaxies in our universe. But even though the expansion had a stabilizing effect on them, they continued to grow, and the denser portions would end up being where stars and galaxies did form. That's what I got out of it anyway. I definitely could be wrong, but I feel like that's not really all that technical. We're just missing some context.
That's so technical. But where is the first fuzzy word? Imagine.
First word is.
What does this tell you about the whole paragraph?
Okay.
That it's a hypothetical? That he's painting a picture with words in order to help people understand his point? It's a book, not a research paper. Books use flowery language to stay interesting, even technical books.
It's his imagination. It's not based on any observable science.
Nope. It's not that it's based on his imagination. It's that he is telling you to imagine something in order to help with your comprehension. I do stuff like this all the time. Creationists do stuff like this all the time. It's normal. It's helpful. Pointing to it as if it's a bad thing is not helpful.
Then he says, must have. Notice he's not sure, but he's just making his statement. They must have. Might have been. He's not even sure about his must have.
Okay.
Okay, I just noticed that there are a lot of ellipses in this quote, so let's go ahead and look at the full context here. I'm not reading the whole page because Mike here has chosen to leave a significant amount of material out of this quote to make it look like it was one singular idea. But the imagine part at the beginning was setting up a thought experiment. We know that the early universe had small fluctuations in density because of the cosmic microwave background radiation. If we are comparing two models of the universe, one static and one inflating, we can determine that the areas of higher density, even if just a little bit higher, would be unstable and subject to local collapse in a static universe. The expansion of the universe, however, causes these areas of density to become less dense as the space within them expands, and so the expansion had a stabilizing effect, allowing for their eventual collapse into stars and galaxies rather than black holes. Now, at this point in the video, Mike is moving from fuzzy words into magic words. I'm going to go ahead and skip his preamble and head straight into his example.
That's true.
Evo-Devo, that's evolutionary development, that's what that means, proposes that genes involved in cobbling together flesh and bone during early growth were repurposed to develop new structures throughout evolution's history by combining their functions in new ways. Where's the magic word? Repurpose.
Okay.
David, can I give you a homework assignment here?
All right.
I want you to go home tonight and repurpose yourself into another creature.
Come on, Mike. Surely you know how ridiculous that is. Nobody has ever suggested that this has happened on such a grand scale that an individual organism could change themselves into a different species of organism. That is utter nonsense. Repurposing is caused when mutations slowly, over the course of several generations, probably several thousand to several million generations, change the structure or function that results from a certain gene into a different structure or function. Like our ear bones, they were originally part of the jaw bones of our ancestors. How do we know this? Through the study of homology and embryology. The cells that develop into our ear bones share the same development path through the stages of an embryo that can be traced back to a single cell that they developed from. And it's the same cell in mammals for their ear bones as it is in reptiles for the jaw bones. It is much easier for evolution to work with genetic material that already exists than to start from scratch.
How does a creature decide to repurpose itself?
Right.
I just left that little bit in so that you could see that him telling David to go repurpose himself wasn't just him being hyperbolic. It seems to be what he actually thinks that scientists believe happens. Otherwise, what is the point in even saying that? Now that's where I'll leave it for now for this video. They do go on quite a bit longer, but my prediction from the beginning held true. They look at 2 more museum signs, 1 book, and then critically examine several unattributed and poorly phrased statements. They also take a hard right turn into morality and abortion. Maybe I'll cover that one in the future. There is just one statement, though, that I pulled from later on in the video that I want to share with you. Then we'll call it quits.
It's amazing. It does something we can't do.
Yes.
Turns sound waves into electrical pulses and sends them to the brain.
I know.
Apparently, speakers and microphones aren't real because converting sounds to electrical signals is something that humans can't do yet. Okay, I'll be generous. Maybe he was talking about transmitting them in ways that our brains can comprehend. So, I guess nobody tell them about cochlear implants. Today's comment of the day comes to us from Jamie Russell, who says, "I wonder why all dinosaur bones have carbon-14 in them." This comment was on last Friday's video that mostly dealt with carbon dating. I wonder if I answered that question in the video. Let's see.
We continually find carbon-14 in dinosaur fossils.
Yep, correct. Remember earlier when I explained that carbon-14 is made in the atmosphere when nitrogen interacts with cosmic rays? Well, a similar reaction can take place in fossils and minerals as a result of interactions with other radioactive particles. Remember, the C14 isn't just disappearing when it decays, it turns into nitrogen. Other radioactive materials nearby can interact with this nitrogen to turn it back into carbon-14. Maybe next time watch the whole video and pay attention if you think you have a question that will undermine my whole position. Thanks for watching, and special thanks as always to my patrons, who are the bacteria who keep the ammonia levels in the fish tank that is my channel low. If you'd like to be my poop-eating bacteria, consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/ViceRhino. Patrons get early access, discounts in my store, and other benefits. You can also follow me on Twitter at ViceRhino, or find my website, PayPal donation link, and Facebook page in the description. See you next time!